right. Now it's time for the intro, my favorite part to record. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Girl and the Galaxy podcast, where we break down all of the astrology that you need to know for the month ahead to energetically prepare. I'm Kate Heinricher, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, permanent guest, friend, professional astrologer, professional witch. Mal Hasty is here in the house. Mal, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome. And I just wanted to tell the listeners that at the moment I'm coming in from a farm in North Carolina. So we might hear some dogs, horses, pigs, woodpeckers, or we might hear an array of animals in the background. So we'll just count that as farm ASMR for the
I love that. And I'm coming to you from Chicago. So if you hear sirens or shouting, that is city AMSR as well.
We have quite the dichotomy of environments on this episode.
Quite the dichotomy of environments. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Mal and I are really here to break down all of the information that you need to know for the month of April. So, if you're new to listening to this podcast, in general, Mal and I are going to reflect a little bit on the previous month first to kind of talk about the major astrology and how it affected us, because it's just as important in working with astrology to reflect as it is to forecast out into the future. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to do a quick overview for the month of April, kind of call out the major themes and the major energy that we can expect for the month ahead. And then we are going to dive into a week by week forecast and really go over everything that you need to know for that week. We're going to talk about the major lunations, the major astrology, all that good stuff coming up. Also, some tips for listening. If you're an astro nerd or you really want to capture this information, I make super cute astrology calendars that are available for immediate download. There's a link in the description of this podcast for you to take it, download it, print it out, jot notes. I do it. I keep these little calendars with me almost at all times. I love them. So those are there for your reference. If you'd like them, they're there for you as well. Mal and I are professional astrologers. So if we get a little overly technical when we're talking about astrology, just let that wash over you and really pay attention to the message and what we have to offer and the guidance that we have to offer through these intense astrological times. April is coming up, and April and May of 2022 have a lot of intense energy packed into them. So Mal and I have a lot to share and a lot to unpack and talk about today. But before we really dive into all of the juicy details about April's astrology, let's reflect a little bit on the month of March. So, Mal, the month of March was a lot, especially globally, on a collective level. There was, as there's a global crisis now, in Europe that is fanning out to the rest of the world. And the astrology also was intense. It's amping up in March and it will continue to escalate, especially until May. We had a lot going on. Venus and Mars had a very powerful conjunction early in March and moved into Aquarius. And then Venus was kind of in this malefic sandwich. Venus was being besieged. And, we were also in Pisces season where there was an element of disillusion or loss of our sense of reality. Mal, how are you feeling after the month of March? And do you have any specific reflections to really share on how this energy was kind of impacting you throughout it all? How are you feeling about March?
Well, March ended up being a very challenging month, I think, for a lot of people, both collectively and individually.
I
And
agree.
I really do think the star of the show for March was the Venus besiegement, or the Venus sandwich between Mars and Saturn. And it kind of makes me think of, in the Orisha pantheon, there's a goddess named Oshun. And in that, in kind of some of the stories from this pantheon, some like creation of the world story that comes from kind of like Oshun's kind of stories. Basically, there's a point in the creation of the world where some of the male gods kind of kick Oshun out, and they're like, "Oh, we don't need her. She just makes the water flow. Like, we don't really need that. What we need to do is like build, 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 and we need to focus on these other things." But what ends up happening is that because they don't have Oshun's water, and her sort of divine energy, her divine feminine energy, the whole world ends up kind of dying, and you can't get anything off the ground because there's not this sort of nourishing, mothering energy that's present. And I definitely butchered that story just a little bit, so definitely look it up on Google after this. But I tell that story because I think it's a good example of what happens when Venus is besieged, when we can't get Venus's like nourishing energy, when we don't have access to Venus as much as we usually do. Things start to feel a little bit hard, a little bit drier. There's more conflict in the air. There's less harmony. There's a bigger feeling of feeling stuck and feeling like I don't exactly know how to move forward on this. So if you've been feeling that, you're definitely not alone. In fact, I think you're pretty tapped into the collective energy. So that would kind of be my collective overview of March. Just a lot of lack of Venus, which can be difficult.
Absolutely. I feel that completely. And it's almost like the energy from the transition from 2021 to 2022 was marked, excuse me, was marked by this really energetically intense Venus retrograde. But then, as soon as Venus was done with her retrograde cycle in the beginning of March, Venus exited its shadow period. But as soon as she did, she was sandwiched in between these two malefics, in between Saturn and Mars. And you said it beautifully. And I love using myths as well to kind of describe that energy. So you really said it perfectly. But it's almost like Venus has not really been dignified. She hasn't really been happy. She hasn't really been in a great place for a very long time, frankly, for months. And I feel like March was almost a continuation of Venus retrograde in that she just was not dignified and she was not happy. And like you said, without that nurturing, juicy, feminine energy, nothing can really grow. So there is this stagnation, there is this stuck in the mudness. With her proximity to Saturn, there's almost been this dryness. There's been like this limitation of pleasure, this limitation of joy, that I've particularly felt a little bit personally, but also that kind of has reverberated out on a collective level. I think I was expecting in March the energy to be a little more distinctive from that of February, but I felt a lot of it was continued. And I think that it was because of this Venus besiegement, of this energy of seriousness, this energy of really honestly an energy that came across as very serious, very I don't know, not fun, something that, on a personal and collective level, I think that the energy of March really called us to find something that we take life more seriously, almost, or forcing us to take life a little bit more seriously, which was uncomfortable and confusing during Pisces season and during a lot of the Mercury, Jupiter, Mercury, Neptune, Sun, Neptune conjunctions. It was almost a little disorienting. And it was as though we were forced to find grounding when it was very difficult to, almost, if that makes sense. I think that I felt, that our vision, I kept on saying, like, our vision is our greatest asset right now. And I think that there are challenges in finding and formulating a vision that is practical and that makes sense, because there's so much confusion around it. I don't know if that makes as much sense, but that's really kind of how I'm feeling into March. It wasn't as easy and fun and fleeting, as I almost thought it would be. And I think that was definitely due to the treatment of Venus completely.
Yeah, for sure. And also, not to mention that both Venus and Mars did square Uranus
Mhm.
towards the end of March. And I think this can kind of result in shocking news or some unexpected, you know, events. Personally, I did feel like I felt the benefit of the Mars, Venus, Uranus square, just because when planets square Uranus, it can kind of inspire a change that we've been needing to make for a while, or it can inspire us to kind of evolve past procrastination and go out and try to seek a new perspective or a new sort of solution. Sort of reminds us that when we're too much in our environment, our kind of everyday environment, and we're having an issue, sometimes we can't see the solution because we're just looking at the same environment every day. So I do think a shift in environment could have happened this month or might be happening in April. But on the other hand, squares to Uranus can be, again, yeah, like shocking news that throws us for a loop, things that we didn't expect. And that also can be difficult. And I was
Mhm.
telling you that, we have so much fixed energy right now in the sky. And because fixed energy is like in the middle, the cardinal signs begin and initiate, and the mutable signs kind of end and wrap things up. Well, fixed signs are like in the middle of like everything. So it kind of feels like sometimes when we have so much fixed energy, especially in Aquarius and Taurus, it's just like I'm in the middle and I can't see the way out, and I also forget why I even started this in the first place. Like, like that's sometimes how I feel.
Oh my gosh. I feel that. I feel that completely for March and April. And it's also like, I'm a Taurus. I have so much fixed energy in my chart. And for me personally, a lot of mutable energy, I also have a lot of cardinal energy, but like a lot of mutable energy and a lot of cardinal energy too. Like what I kind of have been feeling with a lot of the Pisces Aries season is a lot of chaos, frankly. Like this month and April, I'm sorry to say, has a little bit of a chaotic streak to it. There is this need to, for anybody out there that's feeling this as well, there is kind of this need to kind of ground yourself in your own daily practices. And I feel that very, very strongly as we head into April. The need to find grounding in your daily practices. Like this month has really brought me back to all of the nurturing daily practices that I need to pay attention to in order to kind of feel a little bit of solid grounding in this kind of chaotic whirlwind um, of a lot of this astrology that we're dealing with for the next couple weeks. But overall for April, let's dive into kind of what April has in store for us. So let's talk quickly. I want to touch on just the tips from the 2022 Cosmic Guide that we put together. The astro intensity on a level from 1 to 5 for the month of April is a 4.5. So this month is intense there, and we'll break down all of the reasons why. But essentially, the top tips that we have for the month of April is number one, we're at a karmic crossroads. And this month is the moment kind of to decide seeing what things are and what they could be, and really envisioning and learning how to lean into how life could be and cultivating that vision. Number two, it's an important time in April to really step back and examine all of the facts that are in front of your face, because there can be this temptation to drift into la la land or oblivion. So it's important to stay grounded and factual. Number three, another really important energy for April is about finding solutions just in your creative visions as well. Like there is that need to find that balance between reality and dreams. But also like do not disregard your creative visions. And fourth, there is a big loving tug towards new directions and massive structural change, especially towards the end of the month of April. So those are like the top things that Jordan and I put together in our 2022 Cosmic Guide, kind of the major energy for April. You know, this is an important month in general, and each week is really, really juicy. So for anyone out there who's listening, I would highly recommend listening to this episode in its entirety, because each week in April has a lot of potent and powerful astrological transits in store. So that's kind of my part of my part of my overview for April. You know, April is very, it's a lot. It is extremely intense. We're in Aries season. It's going to shift into Taurus season, but when it does, that's when the eclipses kind of come into play. Overall, I think that, this is a month to both find grounding and cultivate our vision for life. What about you, Mel? Any overview or like any what's at the top of your mind for this April?
Well, I do feel, and we'll get to this more in depth, but I do feel like Jupiter in Pisces is going to be a really big player in April. And something that I have learned from this Jupiter in Pisces transit is that it's sometimes better to approach things without expectation and just letting the energy reveal itself to you as time goes on. Because something I've noticed with my own disappointment over Jupiter and Pisces, and you can even listen to, I did a podcast, a YouTube a kind of episode with astrologers Mandy Ray and Vanessa Guy, and we talked about Jupiter and Pisces before it happened. And I do remember feeling super excited and hyping this transit up a lot, because It is Jupiter, the planet of abundance, in its favorite sign, Pisces. Like, why wouldn't we be excited? And I still have some hope for it. But I have realized that working with Jupiter and Pisces, you can't control it. You can't say, okay, Jupiter and Pisces, I want you to bring me good luck in this area, or like, I want you to help me out with this. No, 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 no. Like, we have to invite in Jupiter and Pisces and kind of say, you have free range over where you would like to expand me, but I have to accept that I don't really have control over where I'm going to direct this energy. So I'm kind of just getting its best to let the universe sort of unfold when it comes to the story of this month, instead of placing these grandiose expectations on some of these transits.
So well said. I do feel like especially after 2020 and 2021, us astrologers were so excited for this transit. And it kind of has, because it's not in a Saturn ruled sign anymore, but there has been a lot of disappointment with it. And I completely agree with everything that you're saying. Another thing that's worth mentioning too is that, the end of this month marks the start of eclipse season. Eclipse season in Taurus and Scorpio. It's the first full eclipse season in Taurus and Scorpio. And coupled with the Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces this month and eclipse season on top of that, there is so much surrendering to be done this month. There is this element of surrendering to forces that are outside of our control, and then surrendering a little bit more, which is extremely uncomfortable, especially because, Mars is going to be conjunct Saturn a little bit earlier in the month, and it's going to be squaring the nodes. So there is this element, I think, on a collective and on a personal level of like, what do I do next? What is the right move? Anytime there's some like a square to the nodal axis, I always see it as like that karmic crossroads of how do I take my experience and understand what that is, like what the meaning was there, and move forward. And there's a lot of energy in April about not really understanding completely how to move forward and how to make sense of our present experiences. But sometimes the fact is that you cannot make sense of your present experiences. You can only make sense of them through the lens of time after they've passed. So there is this requirement in April to completely surrender to the present moment and be in the present moment. There is that danger with all of this Pisces energy and the Jupiter Neptune conjunction of losing oneself and checking out of the present moment. But I think the more that we can sink into the present moment, again, without expectation, we are able to navigate these turbid, foggy conditions with more grace and with more ease. And really, instead of struggling against the current, trying to enjoy our present as much as we can is really probably one of the biggest gifts here that we have in April, and something that really is kind of required in April is really learning how to let go and learning how to be led, and also just be present without trying to figure everything out and over rationalize and understand, because there is a lot coming up, especially in this eclipse season, that just makes it like difficult to move forward. I feel like the energy that I get from this eclipse season that's coming up at the end of April is the idea of trying to put your foot on the gas pedal, but the car is just in neutral. Like it can't even move forward if you tried. So there is that element, I think, that's going to be very important in April, of surrendering to the present moment, kind of in order to navigate the fog, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And just one thing to add to that too, so much Piscean energy, we can easily create narratives about the quote unquote truth
Mm,
based off of our feelings. But as that saying goes, feelings are not facts. So I think that's something to remember this month. Feelings, emotions can be really intense, but and it's easier said than done. But if we can
mm,
avoid making our feelings into narratives, that would actually be really helpful because in May, I think we're actually getting some more clarity with Mars and Jupiter moving into Aries. So do know that clarity's coming, and it might not be in our favor to create too many narratives right now.
absolutely. Another message that really came through for me, I was in a really wonderful energy session, a healing session with Um, Rose Hernandez of the Cosmic Body. Shout out. If anybody needs energy work or body work, I would highly 10 out of 10 recommend her, and I can link her in the show notes. But I was in this wonderful energy session on the Pisces new moon, and the overwhelming message that kind of came through to me was let everything you do be led by love. And I think that's the most important message to offer for April. You know, let everything you do be led by love. It's so incredibly important. Again, everything that we've said still applies, but I think that um, letting everything you do be led by love is the most important thing to remember during, especially during this um, Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces. It is so easy to be motivated out of fear or scarcity, especially right now when there's so much uncertainty. But just by sinking into love and letting that be your motivating factor as opposed to fear based scarcity, I think is also another key important takeaway to remember for the entire month of April.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a doozy of a month. There's 3 lunations this month. We've got an Aries new moon, a Libra full moon, and an eclipse on the last day of the month. Um, there's also the Jupiter Neptune conjunction on the 12th. Um, Venus is moving into Pisces on the 5th. Mars is moving into Pisces on the 14th. We get a little Taurus season action towards the end of the month. But overall, there's a lot going on in April. This is big astrology, folks. This is a lot. So, shall we dive into the weeklies, or is there anything more to cover just for the overview?
No, let's do it. I think, yeah, I'm feeling more grounded than I think I would be if I was in my Chicago environment, but because I'm on this farm right now, I feel like I'm grounded enough to talk about this energy.
I love that. I love that. So let's jump right into the first week of April. The first week, I mean, roughly it's going to go from, I mean, the first week and a half ish from the 1st to the 10th, really. There's a lot going on. Day one of April, on April 1st, we have an Aries new moon. And this new moon, the sun will be conjunct Chiron almost exactly, or pretty much exactly. And we also will have Mercury there hanging out in the sign of Aries. Um, this Aries new moon, anytime I think that we have a new moon in Aries, it's the first new moon after the spring equinox. And we get a wonderful time again to plant, to sow the seeds, all of those words associated with new moons. But in a way, the start of the month of April kind of starts with a bang. I do enjoy the energy of this new moon for manifestation work and for sowing the seeds, but I do think that it does have the potential to be very sensitizing. What are your initial thoughts on this new moon, Mal? Any initial reflections or thoughts about it?
Well, I am thinking about Aries being ruled by Mars. So I'm
Mhm.
tempted to kind of look to like, what is Mars doing right now during the time of this new moon? And Mars is approaching its conjunction with Saturn. So I think the sort of sowing of the seeds or the kind of nailing down the foundation kind of has a little bit of like a seriousness to it, or like it kind of reminds me that building the foundation of something isn't always fun. Like there's a little bit of like blood, sweat, and tears with whatever we're initiating on this new moon. And especially with this new moon conjunct Chiron, Chiron being about maybe our wounding or our insecurities or even our traumas that affect us into adulthood. Maybe there's kind of an internal story that needs to be overcome in order for us to start the external new chapter. So it feels to me like foundation building is really big, but it's not going to be like fun, happy, joy foundation building. It's going to be kind of a more serious note, if that makes sense, Kate.
I I love that. I completely agree. It's not always fun. There are blood, sweat, and tears. And I also think that the proximity to Chiron is also a little brings up some tenderness. You know, anytime the moon is in a close proximity to Chiron, it brings up a lot of the themes of things that we either have. It brings up the theme primarily that healing is nonlinear. And at some point, even though we might have feel like the years of therapy and healing that we have done have caused us to grow, there can always be something that hits that tender spot in us. And I think that with this new moon, it is important to remember not to be motivated by the fear of getting hurt again or the fear of reopening that tender spot, but rather acknowledging that the wounds and the trials and the tribulations that we've been through have actually made us who we are. And they have helped create an authentic person out of us. And in the sign of Aries, you know, this especially brings up wounds around our authenticity, you know, and perhaps even parts of ourselves that we might not be comfortable with, or perhaps parts of ourselves that we might feel challenged to accept in order to set the intentions or in order to set the seeds for whatever it is we would like to grow. It might require us to look back at these wounds around our authenticity and reclaim them and embody them and say, you know what, this is who I am. And despite all of the trials and tribulations and hurt that I might have experienced in my past, I am willing to re examine those with love and move forward with the intention of loving my whole self, despite any and all past experiences. And, you know, at first I saw this new moon and I do like it, but it definitely has the it definitely has the ability to be sensitizing. So to anybody out there, just be easy on yourself during this new moon. Don't overdo it. Please do not overdo it. With that Aries energy, I think there might be the temptation to make an impulse decision, to act overly hastily, or to try to rush the healing process. But that's not how healing works. It's not linear, and it doesn't just resolve itself overnight. So use this new moon to honor all of the parts of yourself and don't rush it. Don't expect, the intentions or the seeds that you sow to, happen right away. There is a process that has to be honored with this energy and with this new moon. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, Kate. I love that. And I think I would say the past couple years, the Aries new moon has been close to Chiron. So we're familiar with this new moon's energy. In a way, we've been going through Aries new moons conjunct Chiron for a couple years. And something I'm kind of reminded of too is that something that Melanie Reinhardt, who is an astrologer who wrote about, I think, Chiron, and her book is called Chiron, The Healing Journey. And The Healing Journey, it's a fascinating study on Chiron. And something she talks about with specifically Mercury Chiron influences, which I could say this new moon does have a slight Mercury Chiron influence because they're about 4 degrees apart in this new moon. And Mercury Chiron can often be like the comedian, almost like healing wounds through comedy and like the spoken word.
Just, yeah.
Yeah. And even if you watch any comedy special, and you will see Mercury Chiron as something kind of archetypally there, because it's people taking their wounds and talking about it and kind of transforming it through comedy. The other thing too that I think about is like TikTok, and I'm such a millennial for saying this, but sometimes when I think about the state of the world and I get depressed, there is something about TikTok that gets me kind of optimistic, because I always say like, damn, like people are so funny. Like humans are hilarious. Like especially I don't even know, like just the things that people do and come up with, like there's just such a sense of humor, and it reminds me of our resilience as a species, like the fact that we can laugh, the fact that we can recognize like irony and satire and all of that stuff. So I don't know, if you're not feeling like planting any new seeds on this new moon, watch your favorite comedian and you'll still be kind of tapping into this new moon's energy in some way.
I love that. That is so spot on, Mel. And I also think that applies for Friday and that Saturday the 2nd, because that Saturday, April 2nd, is when Mercury will be conjunct the sun, and Mercury will be conjunct Chiron exactly that day too. So to go off what you were saying, that whole first weekend would be a wonderful time to watch some comedy and to find some solace in jest. I always think that the jester is the only person who can speak truth to the king. I always think about that when I think of like the Mercury or like Mercury Jupiter dynamics completely.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's so funny.
There is that element when it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it with Mercury as well. But I do also think that that weekend is an important time to, especially on that Saturday and Sunday, really an important time to be conscious of your words and using your words wisely. I think the Mercury, we just saw the Oscars last night. Like we're recording this right after the Oscars. And all I could, with the whole Will Smith fiasco at the Oscars last night, how Will Smith went up and literally hit Chris Rock, like physical violence. Not cool at all. I thought that's so Mercury in Aries, though. It's just so Mercury in Aries. So I think that that whole fiasco was a direct manifestation of Mercury in Aries energy. And, you know, if that is, if that, using that as an example of the potential to escalate, the potential things have to escalate the first weekend of April, like, please, to anybody listening, just take a step back when conversations get heated, or if you feel offended by something that somebody says, or if something that somebody says kind of touches a nerve. Take a step back and think before you act. Like, pause, put an intentional pause between your actions and your thoughts and your actions, because we don't want to have another, Will Smith, Chris Rock scenario, especially that first weekend of April. Cool off before you move forward that first weekend of April.
Good advice, definitely. And I couldn't help but think too, Venus would be kind of the ruler of something like the Oscars because it's like an award ceremony for the arts, and Venus being besieged at the moment. And like, there's disruption in the arts industry. Like it was for sure. Yeah, there was some Aries, Mercury, Venus besieged influence that we all saw last night. I was wondering if we were going to talk about that. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I felt like for the Mercury Chiron energy, it's in Aries, it's very appropriate. That was clearly a sensitizing moment that was taken too far. And there's that potential the first weekend of April. So just cool off, like, and channel any extra energy into physical activities or your passions. So let's move on to this first full week of April, starting with Monday, April 4th. So this Monday, April 4th, kind of marks an important moment in the month as well. This is the day where Mars comes together in the sky with Saturn. There is a Mars-Saturn conjunction in the sign of Aquarius. Do you have any initial thoughts? What are your thoughts on this one, Mel, for the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius on the first kind of full week of March? Kind of sets a very interesting tone for the week.
Yeah, my guess would be that in general we'll be feeling this more collectively, just because like in more of a mundane perspective, Mars is like the ruler of war and global conflict, and Saturn can sometimes be maybe leadership or structures of countries and stuff like that. So I am wondering if around this time maybe this story continues to unfold with our Ukraine conflict at the moment, and thinking about things too, just like gas prices and even like the right way of navigating this conflict and who we give that authority to. I think there's some greater questions around our authority and our structures when it comes to our governmental organization. So that's what I'm thinking will probably show up around then.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also worth mentioning that the Aquarius energy of this all, um, Aquarius energy emphasizes collective action. It emphasizes groups of people or groups of nations that come together in order to solve and tackle big problems. I often think within the context of the Aquarius Leo polarity, Leo is opposite of Aquarius. They're two sister signs, essentially. I think of Leo as tribalism, as, the nation, as everybody's, part of the same team. But then I think of Aquarius as the group, and I think of Leo energy. I think, we are, I think, we are France. But then when I think of the Aquarius energy, France is a part of NATO and the European Union, and there are different, and now with all of this energy so strong in Aquarius, we see it manifesting in a lot of collective action, and a lot of nations coming together to tackle these problems and to, literally it's requiring Europe to come together and other nations in NATO to come together to kind of tackle and try to attack this problem from a collective perspective. This is not a time when the United States or any other nation for that matter is taking unilateral, hegemonic action towards, this aggressor in Europe. This is a time of collective action. And I think that with this Mars-Saturn conjunction, again, to what you were saying, the first full week of April, I think it is a time where we will see again highlighted the need for collective action, or even increased collective action and sanctions, or how like a collective escalation of sorts I could see kind of manifesting on a collective level around this first week of April. But also I do feel like on a personal level, this is going to highlight the importance of boundaries and of where we draw that line in the sand. If that makes sense, there is going to be, I feel like, this energy of, how far is too far, and what are we willing to tolerate and what are we absolutely not willing to tolerate. And also Aquarius energy always has to do with, human rights and the greater good. So I think that all of those are going to be kind of stewing in the collective, and, on a personal level, it might especially highlight our boundaries, but also our collective values, and kind of connecting ourselves to a larger collective value or collective value system. I think that also collectively, the Saturn in Aquarius narrative has been about vaccines and vaccinations and fighting the pandemic as well. So I'm really also interested to see what kind of comes about in April in terms of vaccination progress and any updates with the vaccination or vaccination requirements. And it's also worth saying that the last time Mars was in Aquarius was in 2020, right when we went into kind of lockdown again. And I just am kind of interested to see how this energy will play out and what's going to happen with the pandemic. I can't even pretend to predict at this point what to expect, but there's something kind of intuitively telling me that April, it's not looking too good for the pandemic, to be completely frank. I think I am just a little concerned with pandemic awareness and another strain of Omicron that is sweeping across the nation, as we even speak. So that's kind of how I'm feeling into this. I'm a little concerned globally and locally, personally, with a lot of the themes around the pandemic, especially this first week of April. I just think that those tensions have the potential to escalate as well. I mean, and that's not to be scared, it's to be prepared a lot
Well,
with a lot of this astrology.
I agree, Kate, for sure. And maybe just a little tip for listeners who are familiar with their natal chart. The story in your Aquarius house specifically has been kind of developing even since the end of 2020 with the great conjunction of Jupiter. Was that end of 2020? Yeah.
Yeah, December, I think it was December 19th, 2020.
Yeah, so we had that great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius. And, you know, Jupiter's been through your Aquarius house, Saturn is going through your Aquarius house now. So, you know, even if you're not totally familiar with your chart, I mean, I can say that you know on some level like this Aquarius house in your life, because it's probably representative of a bigger challenge that you've been having in the past couple years, or a bigger cycle. So I'm thinking about this Mars conjunct Saturn in your Aquarius house. Like, what is this adding to the story of that house in your natal chart? So just something, a little tip for our maybe more intermediate advanced astrology students listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Kate's
this
intuition is like, this ain't going well.
I know. And the thing about this first week of April, that it 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 really it's like big highs and big lows, honestly, is how I feel about this first week of April and April in general. It's just full of, the good and the bad come in equal measure and kind of cancel each other out, and we're back at neutral. That's really how I feel strongly, especially about this first week of April, because the Monday we have this Mars Saturn conjunction, which frankly I don't think is a huge walk in the park. On the bright side, it helps us commit, but on the shadowy side can really test our boundaries and aggravate a lot of themes in the collective. But the next day Venus moves into the sign of Pisces. Thank goodness, right? So at the same time, we have a lot of bit of intensity on Monday. On Tuesday, Venus moves out of the sign of Aquarius and into the sign of Pisces, where she is exalted, and now Venus is present in the sky with Jupiter and Neptune. But Venus in Pisces, this finally, Venus is dignified. Finally, Venus is feeling good. And finally, for the first time in months, Venus really has the potential to deliver us a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of honey. I especially think the first week of April, there's a lot of a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down energy. And it's important to remember through it all that the good and the bad will come in equal measure. And it is perfectly acceptable to, focus in on that honey, on that sweetness and on that goodness, and really be grateful for that through this time period. Be grateful for the sweetness that life does give us when we can, because it's very important. How are you feeling, Mel, about the Venus in Pisces transit? Venus is going to be in Pisces from around the 5th of April until the beginning of May, until May 2nd. So really for most of the month of April, Venus is going to be in a pretty good condition. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good about, Venus almost, coming back to herself after
Yeah.
a good 6 months, even over 6 months of being ruled by Saturn. And now Venus is ruled by Jupiter in Pisces. And I think this is going to be good for both Venus and Jupiter, where like the benefics or the planets that tend to bring good things are both positioned together now. But then, like you said, the malefics, Mars and Saturn, the planets who tend to bring more challenging things, are also positioned together. So to echo what you said, good things and bad things come in equal measure. And it also reminds me too that when things are kind of in this, maybe things are feeling a little bit extreme. How do we move through extremism? I think it goes back to how can we remain neutral in extremism? How can we delay developing narratives about what this may mean? Something about the Four Agreements comes to mind by Miguel Don Ruiz, and he says something about like take nothing personally, both the good things and the bad things, because when you take the good things personally, then you're also going to take the bad things personally. So what can we do to kind of just witness and be a viewer of everything that is going on, a non-judgmental viewer? But on the other hand, too, I think Venus in Pisces is going to be a really good influence if you've been feeling writer's block or a little bit of stagnation with your artwork, or if you're a dancer or an artist or a musician or whatever. Some really famous poets and writers had Venus in Pisces, and I do kind of look forward to seeing what the collective will create at this time. And oftentimes it's the hardest moments that where artists birth their greatest work. So that's kind of what this reminds me of as well.
Artists, this is the time where artists birth their greatest work. Yes, I love that for this transit. That is very well said. Spot on. And that's going to carry through the rest of the month too, especially as of these themes of deep creativity and vision. I also feel like this Jupiter in Pisces transit has not given, like, as we've talked about earlier in the podcast, it hasn't been as wonderful as us astrologers have, hopefully predicted. There's been an element of a little bit of disappointment, or like, where is it? Like, what's happening? Where are the blessings? Where are the gifts from our fairy godmother? And it's like Jupiter is like the fairy godmother of the zodiac. And, it's in a pretty decent sign right now. So there is this element of like, where is everything? And I think that the Venus in Pisces will give us more of that energy of, okay, great. Now we're getting a little bit more of that juice, of that honey, of that sweetness that this transit really has to offer. Also, so let's talk about the other major transit of this week. Towards the end of the week on Sunday, Mercury will leave that sign, the fires of Aries, and move into Taurus. Now, thank goodness we have Mercury moving into Taurus this week, because it really will help give us some of the grounding earthy energy that we need to navigate the next week of April. We'll talk about why in a second, but Mercury will move into Taurus on April 10th. At the same time, it will square Pluto right before it moves into Taurus. But in general, this is, I think, a necessary pump the brakes moment at the end of this week. It is a necessary, like, whoa, slow down, take all of the information that we have and get really thorough and focus on understanding instead of producing or going or moving. Take a moment to sit and find a little bit of stillness in this energy that we're in order to find clarity. Like that Sunday, I think, is extremely important for us literally to slow down, take a chill pill, really focus on understanding what's right in front of you more than anything, instead of producing. Literally focus on what is in front of you and what is on your plate. Don't overly indulge in those hypotheticals, and really get down to brass tacks with this one, especially on that Sunday. How are you feeling into the Mercury and Taurus vibes for the rest of April?
I kind of like it because, Venus will be sextiling Mercury
Mm-hmm.
and Taurus. And I think that's really nice. Again, supporting all of that artwork, kind of creativity stuff we were speaking to. And just in general, I like to think about like Pisces and Taurus. Why do they sextile each other? Well, we kind of have the marrying of the earth and the ether. Like if Taurus is like planting the garden, Pisces is like when we also put the fairy house in the garden to attract the fae energy to bless the garden. So it's like, it's like this like beautiful, yeah, earth and ether kind of marrying. So at the very least, I think our spring gardens are going to be thriving this springtime. It's a really good moment to just tap into the energy of nature at this moment. Shadow side of Mercury in Taurus might be a little bit about getting too stuck in one's own perspective, being unable to see other people's point of view. One of my favorite examples of this is if anybody's a Real Housewife fan, Teresa Giudice from Real Housewives of New Jersey is a Mercury in Taurus native. And I tend to think she's a really great example of sometimes the shadow side of Mercury and Taurus. There are many episodes where she gets really defensive and she's literally unable to see anybody's side but her own within an argument. So Mercury and Taurus can kind of have us entering an argument with the perspective that we've already won, instead of entering an argument about like, okay, how can I see this other's perspective? How can we compromise? So I think compromise is really key when it comes to any maybe disruptions in your daily life during Mercury and Taurus. But again, I don't think it's going to actually show up that often as the shadow side, just because it's sextiling Mercury or sextiling Venus. So
I have Mercury in Taurus.
okay,
I
so
am a Mercury and Taurus native as well, and I can validate everything that you've said.
right,
And
like
sometimes I can get a little fixed in my ways of thinking as well. But also, one thing, I'm a really slow reader, and I've always felt like a little bit of shame with that my entire life. And it's like been a struggle for me to learn how to read very quickly, especially like with standardized testing and taking the SATs and stuff. Like I like to read and I love to write, and the language arts has always been my strength over math and shit like that. Um, but I will say my Mercury and Taurus, it's also square Saturn. So there's a little more difficulty to unpack there. But in general, I always just need a minute to understand how to respond to information. I can get all of the information and let it wash over me, but I'm not quick with the ability to be able to, you know, come up with the perfect response on the spot. I can get it. I will understand it, but I just need a minute to digest it. And that I think is a very Mercury and Taurus energy, so I think taking a moment to digest all of the information that has flooded into your experience over the past couple weeks is really important. Also, Venus and Mercury will be sextiling each other, and they're both and they're, I mean, and Taurus is a Venus ruled sign, and Venus is in great condition. So I think that, like you said, also there's a lot of creative potential with this one. But don't be afraid as well, just to slow down and to literally take a minute to respond. And I guarantee you, by just taking an extra second to thoroughly digest all of the information before acting, you're going to have a better outcome in that, if that makes sense. And that's something that I've had to learn as a Mercury and Taurus native. One of my strengths is being extremely thorough. And that's not the case with, a Mercury and Aries placement. It's like your strength is being able to rattle everything off and to remember things quickly and to come up with a quick, quippy response. Mercury and Taurus strength is thoroughness and understanding every single little detail to the point where it's like painful or beating a dead horse. So I think that's another strength that we have with us for the rest of April as well, is being able to get that thoroughness that we need and getting all of the information before moving forward and making the decision, if that makes sense.
You also reminded me too that literally in order to digest food, we have to be in the parasympathetic nervous system. So we can't digest our food properly when we're in fight, flight, or freeze. That's why when we get really stressed out, we often lose our appetite, or if we're constantly in a heightened nervous system state, we might also develop like vitamin and mineral deficiencies because our bodies might not be able to get the food or the nourishment. So literally digesting your food comes when you are at peace of mind. Same with digesting information. So I love that you said that, Kate.
Perfect. So well said. I love, you said it even perfect. Yeah, I love that. I would, and that's why I love astrology. I wish somebody would have told me this about myself when I was a kid, and being like, take your time to digest information. You're not going to be the fastest reader in the class. Don't expect to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't mean you're not smart. Just because it takes you a minute to really come to a thorough understanding does not mean that you're not intelligent. I was like, I got good grades. It just took me a little longer. So let's move on to week 3, from the 11th to the 17th. Now, this is probably the most astrologically intense week, not just of April, but of 2022 in general. And that is because this is the week where we have the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. And actually, I think 4 major events happen this week. 1, Saturn will be square the nodes on the 11th. Jupiter will be conjunct Neptune on the 12th. Mars will move into Pisces on the 14th. And there is a big, gorgeous Libra full moon on the 16th. So there is a lot to unpack this week for the 3rd week of April. Like, so much energy happening here. Now, let's start first with the 11th, with Saturn square the nodes. So to start off this week, Saturn will be literally at a halfway point between the North Node and the South Node. And generally, I think that this will bring a lot more collective significance than personal significance. Saturn will be hanging out at around 22 degrees Aquarius at around this time. So if you do have any personal placements around 22 degrees Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, or Scorpio, then this will definitely affect you a little bit more. But I also think that on a collective level, this is going to be another important turning point. This is going to be another very important moment collectively to decide what is best for the collective, if that makes sense. I think that this is a moment where there might be a call of like, how do we tackle an existential issue as a group, with a group consciousness or group thinking, which has pros and cons. This number 1, it presents the issue of groupthink and of silencing dissent. which I think is another major possibility of thinking, if you are not in, you are out, and if you do not adhere to the consensus viewpoint, then you are ostracized or cast out, which is kind of scary. But it also presents another, on the bright side, that also does present the ability to come together as a collective and tackle massive existential threats or issues. And again, I think that this could potentially manifest as, collective action in Europe or collective action in the United States against some type of pandemic topic, or who knows, we don't know what we don't know yet. But I think that this week will certainly highlight the need for collective action and put us to the test in how we as a society choose to tackle big issues. So pay attention to the news this week. This is an important week where the collective tides are turning, and it does represent a very important turning point for our collective and our collective consciousness.
Agreed.
How are you feeling into this, Mel?
Yeah, I think you really spoke to the energy here in a really great way. I'm thinking that when we have that T square between Saturn and the nodes, Saturn is at the focal point or the top of the T square.
Mm-hmm.
And some astrologers will say, well, how do we mitigate a T square? We actually look for what is kind of at the opposite of the focal point. And the Leo is a sign, and also the moon will be in Leo that day. So looking at like, how can Leo actually help us solve the problem of a T square between Taurus, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And I'm thinking about like Leo being our unique talents and gifts. So maybe for whatever collective chaos kind of might brew up during this time, maybe we're also thinking about what are my unique gifts that I can kind of use to aid in the situation. What can I offer, and how can I be of service in this moment? One thing I also do want to say too, Kate, and I know this is way down in the future, but on August 1st, I just thought of this. On August 1st, we'll actually have a conjunction with Mars in Taurus at the nodes. And it'll be
North Node.
Right. And like this T square kind of continues. So I feel like this is a larger story too. And it tends to be like that with the nodes. Like, there's this story that's unfolding. So yeah, maybe keep an eye out with what happens around that April 11th, but also know that this story will continue to unfold at least until beginning of August.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, this story is one that will unfold, and I have my sights set on the end of July and August. That is some crazy astrology happening there, which we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, right? So let's move on to the major event of April, and honestly, a major event of 2022. On April 12th, the planets Jupiter and Neptune will come together in the sign of Pisces at 23 degrees Pisces. So the exact date is April 12th, but more broadly, they will be traveling together from the 8th to about the 17th. There's so much to unpack here. This is a really, really juicy topic. So I want to do this topic justice. Jupiter and Neptune are two planets actually that both co-rule the signs of Neptune. And they both have to do, Jupiter is this planet of expansion and increase and learning. And Neptune is the energy also of the collective consciousness, of creativity, of transcendental compassion and love. But both of these energies really have to do with the collective tides and collective consciousness, collective trends. That's also a theme of Pisces. Jupiter and Neptune come together in the sky once every 13 years. The last time they came together was in 2009 in the sign of Aquarius. And the last time they met in the sign of Pisces was in 1856. And the next time they will come together in the sign of Pisces won't be until 2188. So there is a lot. So again, the next time Jupiter and Neptune will come together in Pisces will be in a very long time from now. And this energy, anytime Jupiter and Pisces come together, it really, in my opinion, really represents trends in collective consciousness and trends in collective thinking and collective ethos. Do you know what if that makes sense? But like how everybody thinks when everybody's kind of on the same wavelength. And I think what's been so interesting is now we've been in this balsamic phase of this Jupiter Neptune conjunction for several years now. And what's so interesting to me is that there are a lot of collective ways of thinking that were ushered in 2009, which also coincides with the election of Barack Obama and the ingress of Pluto into Capricorn, and all of these collective ways of thinking that have to do with, equality, like the topic of equality, the topic of race in our society. It's always been there, but I think has been so highlighted, especially since 2009 and the election of our first Black president of the United States. And we've seen both the embrace of these ideas of equality and also a massive backlash against them. When I think of Jupiter and Neptune coming together in the sign of Aquarius, the sign of Aquarius is the energy of human rights, of equality, of equal rights, and we saw with the election of Obama, a lot of progressive legislation put into place, not as progressive as a lot of people would like, but nonetheless, gay people have the right to get married now. We have a lot more rights and freedoms than we have otherwise. But with that came a huge backlash against that. So I see a lot of this astrology as a collective, like another collective tide is turning. And no, I can't specifically say how that will manifest, but I do think that this Pisces energy will bring in a lot more compassion, and a lot more emphasis towards the fact that of boundarylessness, if that makes sense. I think that Aquarius is often associated with queerness, and I see Pisces as more associated with like transness and like the lack and a lot more fluidity. Aquarius, although it does have that emphasis on equality and humanitarianism, Pisces is almost that to a spiritual level. So I feel like this week in particular, in 2022 in general, is really ushering in more a collective consciousness that is more attuned to the lack of boundaries, the lack of differences between us as human people, and more compassion, more creativity, but also more creative innovation and creative thinking, like being able to see things that have never existed before and be able to bring those into life, I think is something that we're going to see very strongly over the next 13 years. But it's a very, it's a very fascinating and interesting cycle. How are you feeling into this Jupiter Neptune conjunction, Mel?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely hard to put your finger on just like one thing that it could signify, because like
Right.
it's a general more zoomed out collective view. And I really like the things that you mentioned. I definitely am also tapping into like kind of the sort of either sexual or gender fluidity of human nature that is kind of becoming a little bit more widely accepted.
Mm.
Realization that gender and these social norms were all constructed by the government, essentially, or whatever.
Systems of power,
It technically, like, that sort of heteronormative family system of like mother, father, two kids, blah blah blah, it technically makes capitalism go round. So when we actually challenge those social norms, which I think will happen a lot more during the next 13 years, this is kind of a reflection of that Jupiter Neptune influence. And I think we're already seeing sort of the backlash of that. Like, if we look
Yeah.
at these really just kind of atrocious, trans, anti-trans legislature, and even like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. Like, why is that happening? Well, for some collectively, our energy is actually moving towards a little bit more of like acceptance, fluidity, equality, and the system sees that and tries to kind of stop it, right? But
Right.
with, hey, here's the thing, with Pluto in Scorpio generation, Pluto in Sagittarius generation, good fucking luck. Because we get off on like we get off on like challenging the system. So the one thing I'll say too is that I think we might be connecting a little bit more with our spiritual selves outside of organized religion. And we know that organized religion has been dying for a long time. But I do find that some people have thrown like the baby out with the bathwater. And I do think this is, of course, coming from a double Pisces. So keep this in mind. But I do think that there is something inherent about human nature that wants to connect with a higher source or a higher power, even if that is just like nature and maybe divine energy, universal energy, even astrology. I think we're going to be seeing astrology and spirituality being more widely practiced. So a lot of those taboos around astrology, tarot, witchcraft, I think it's just going to become more popular.
Mm-hmm.
One thing too, I'll say, and I'll pull up the chart, Kate, but a famous person who actually was born during the last Pisces Jupiter Neptune conjunction was Sigmund Freud. And I think it's cool that he had that Jupiter Neptune in Pisces conjunction in his chart, that he was born in 1856. So he kind of reimagined the whole realm of psychology. Like we started thinking about the human psyche in a completely different way once he started presenting his ideas. So I think this is maybe a good example of things that can happen during a Neptune Jupiter conjunction. Like, our perspective completely shifts. We discover something that we didn't even think about. Kind of reminds me of like even mushrooms being one of the most intelligent species, if not the most intelligent species on the planet. It makes me wonder, like, during the next 13 years, will we discover how to cure cancer with mushrooms? Like, will we discover a new medicine? Will we discover a way that we can heal trauma? Like there's a bunch of things we could potentially stumble upon. Yeah, so those are my very grand thoughts.
Grand thoughts and plans
Yeah.
about the another thing. Also, the last time, I love everything that you said. I also think it's important to add like the potential for pop culture and like iconic events to happen. In another time that Jupiter and Neptune came together was in 1997. And that was also the same year that Titanic came out and Harry Potter came out too. So, and also in 2009, Obama was kind of an iconic, like was and is a very iconic figure. And that was also the same year that Michael Jackson died. And there also are, and Princess Diana died in 1997 as well. So there's this element of Jupiter Neptune conjunctions where we see iconic events happen, either like the death of iconic people or the birth of iconic brands. I think Coca-Cola was another brand that came out with their bottle and their image during a Jupiter Neptune conjunction as well. So there's like a lot of iconic pop culture events. And I also think that Pisces, Jupiter, and Neptune are all three kind of pop culture significators. So I think that there's a lot of potential for new iconic events, new iconic figures to either come into our existence this year or exit our existence this year. There's a lot to be said for that. I also did some reading on the topic too, and Jupiter Neptune conjunctions are also associated with, like, I know this sounds awful to say, but kind of pandemics and epidemics as well, unfortunately. In 1997, there was the bird flu crisis, and in 2009, there was a crisis with the swine flu. So the fact that we are living in the middle of a pandemic, I am just a little skeptical about the month of April. I'm a little hesitant to call the pandemic over astrologically. There definitely seems like there could be another wave, another kind of round that we get served up here in April. And again, I'm not saying this to be scared or to scare everyone. But this is just something to be very conscious of, and conscious of the fact that the pandemic is not over, unfortunately, and we do have to move on with our lives because that's the structure that we live in. But just, again, especially in the middle of the month, just be very conscious, especially if you're around anybody who's immunocompromised. This pandemic is not over, and just the astrology of April kind of speaks to that as well.
Definitely. And for our astrology students, why do Jupiter and Neptune conjunctions often signify mass spread of disease? Well, Neptune kind of rules over like bacteria and germs and disease and pandemics. And Jupiter is the planet of expansion. So we get the expansion of Neptunian things. And even we're thinking of these two things in a water sign. And COVID kind of spreads through like water droplets in the air, so this is it's just the reality of the situation here.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yeah, trying to think again. This is a pretty big topic. But the past several Jupiter Neptune conjunctions have corresponded with with a lot of just spread of disease. Also, another call out in 1932, there was a Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Virgo, literally in the opposite sign of Pisces. And this coincided with the Great Depression. Not saying there's going to be another Great Depression now, but I think that there is something to be said about a lot of the collective, the ethos uniting behind something. And I think that in April will be a potent time. We live in such a divided society at this point. So although there's a lot on the horizon, I do have a little bit of, I don't want to say hope, but I do have just a sense that the polarization that we've been living through might feel like it's kind of subsiding a little bit, if that makes sense. And we might be able to unite behind something again a little bit and be slightly less polarized. That might be my inner optimist speaking, but there is something about this that kind of says that the polarization that we've been living through for so long we might feel a little more united around a common cause than we have in a while with this.
We need your optimism right now. We need your Leo.
I know. Oh boy, oh boy. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, there's a lot there. I think, yeah, on a personal level, I would encourage everybody to look at where Pisces lives in your chart and to see where this conjunction is happening in your chart and kind of see how the themes of that house are really amped up. And if you got our 2022 cosmic guide, we do that for you in your own little section and tell you all about how this major astrology is kind of affecting you. So anything else to add on the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, Mel, before we move on to the rest of this big week of April?
I feel like, I'm ready to just let that unfold and, not put too many words or expectations to it and just kind of see what happens. So please write to me or Kate via email or Instagram and let us know your experience with the Jupiter Neptune conjunction. We would love to collect your stories for our next episode.
Absolutely. So let's move on to that Thursday, the 14th. So if you think that we are in a foggy situation in April, this Thursday brings a little more fog into our experience. This Thursday is when Mars moves into the sign of Pisces. How are you feeling into Mars moving into Pisces, Mel? What are your thoughts on this transit?
So by this point, once Mars moves into Pisces, this will be the fourth planet now in Pisces. So it almost marks this moment where we shift over from like that heavy Aquarius energy we were experiencing in like February and March. And now we're shifting into more of like that Pisces, even Aries energy. So in a way, I kind of look forward to that. Mars being a planet of like strategy and action and how we kind of navigate our goals. Mars and Pisces is an interesting mix because Pisces it doesn't really have structure. Pisces is about like the spiritual realm and the ethers and even things that are not tangible. So Mars finding its way through Pisces, it's kind of like, we turn into a fairy. Like we're like Tinkerbell or like Thumbelina, and we have to like almost become this like mythical creature in order to find our way through. I do think that during Mars and Pisces, it's a really great time to like connect with like the spirit of animals or the spirit of like a crystal or a certain flower, work with an herb or a tincture, get to know it. Because again, we want to go about things like we wouldn't normally go about them. Like, I mean, think of it. Like if you had a problem, your first impulse probably wouldn't be like, oh, let me work with a tincture that has to do with opening my throat chakra and seeing like, how could that possibly give me some information and perspective. But like that's kind of the stuff that Mars and Pisces wants us to do. It's like we visit the spiritual supplies store, the metaphysical shop, and we look for solutions kind of outside of how we would usually go about solving a problem.
Yeah, I love that. It kind of just reminds me it's kind of like walking down a non-linear road. It's like walking through, instead of walking in a straight line, you're walking in circles to get to where you would like to go, or swimming in circles really in order to move forward. Jordan Sharma, our other astrologer friend, always describes Mars and Pisces as like trying to punch through water, like, and when you're trying to like fight with something underwater, the rules don't really apply. Physics is different. You're not operating, you're not moving in a way that you would expect, or in a normal functional way with Mars and Pisces. I think that this Mars and Pisces transit really also just adds to this dreamy Pollyanna-esque tone that we have throughout the month of April. When I think of Mars and Pisces, I always am reminded, I'll never forget the last time Mars was in Pisces, which was during the pandemic. Specifically, Mars was in Pisces when the Black Lives Matter, when we saw the murder of George Floyd, and we saw the massive Black Lives Matter protests break out across the nation. And for me, that was such a Mars and Pisces moment, because it was about collective actions that served this larger ideal. That's when we really saw the escalation of defunding the police. And it really is this like, I hate to say Pollyanna-esque thinking, but that's just really kind of what comes to mind. But it is this dream. It's like aligning your actions with this dream that's so much bigger than yourself, with this vision that you don't even know if it's even guaranteed in our lifetime, but you're willing to work for it and fight for it regardless of the outcome. And there's this energy that I feel a little hesitant, a little like reticent about Mars and Pisces, because it often seems like what we dream and what we act towards and what we work towards with Mars and Pisces kind of has an expiration date to it, of like, can this actually last in our physical reality? Like, is this too good to be true? Can this actually work when it meets the reality of the systems that we live under? So I would say with Mars and Pisces this week, dream that impossible dream, but also it is a valiant effort to work towards something that you're not sure can actually manifest in our systems and in our society, given the structures that be. But you can try, but again, approach it with detachment, kind of like you were saying earlier, Mal, of approaching our actions with a healthy sense of detachment and objectivity. I think it's very important, because I think there's a risk to Mars and Pisces that the dream has an expiration date, or the dream might not last as long as we would like. That doesn't mean it's not valid. It just means that it might be too ahead of its time. You can hold on to that dream and keep it with you, but don't become overly attached to it, because it might just not, it might just need a little bit of tweaking, or it might not I don't know. I might get crushed. I think that's like the shadowy side that we have here. But on the shiny side, Mars and Pisces does help us align our actions with a much greater dream or vision that's bigger than ourselves. It's also worth saying that Mars will be in Pisces from the 14th of April to the 24th of May. So pretty much during eclipse season. So I also think this Mars and Pisces transit is going to even further the need to surrendering to forces outside of our control, or kind of dealing with and managing forces outside of our control. And it's important during this time period to really cultivate and step into that attitude of surrender and surrendering to those forces that seem very out of our control, because the options for more of our personal agency and autonomy will really come to fruition more towards the end of May. When Mars moves into Aries at the end of May, it will come together with Jupiter in Aries, which is going to really ignite a fire under all of our asses, I think, a little bit more towards the end of May. So now is really not necessarily the time to push for our personal agenda, but more so to surrender and to cultivate aspects of our faith as well with this energy.
Definitely. And Kate, you kind of reminded me too, like, there is kind of something about like, yeah, religion and spirituality, like with Pisces, and how does it get mixed in with Mars, the planet of action. And one of my astrology teachers, Achyuta Bhava, he often talks about how Mars in Pisces is kind of like the martyr or the saint, like
Yeah.
the warrior who is dying for a greater cause. So I don't know, I was raised Catholic, so if you want to maybe tune back into the saint you picked for your project or whatever, might be kind of a good way to work with Mars and Pisces, like study a saint or study a martyr, someone who died for their cause, and kind of tap into their energy. Now, one other thing I'll say too, and this is, sorry, apologies for my ninth house always coming in with like a movie yearbook reference.
Or a teacher.
So I will say that I'm a big fan of using movies and TV shows as a way to kind of tap into astrological energies. And I was looking up different people who do have Mars in Pisces natally. And there's an actor named Lee Pace. He was in shows like Pushing Daisies, and he had some minor roles in like Twilight and The Hobbit. But he has natal Mars in Pisces, and he actually stars in one of my favorite movies called The Fall. It's a little bit more of a like indie kind of movie, but it takes place in the 1920s at like a hospital in the outskirts of LA. And Lee Pace plays a stuntman who is like injured, and he's like stuck in the hospital because he got injured doing a stunt for a movie. And he meets this little girl who has broken her arm at the hospital. And he starts telling her all of these like fantastical stories. And the whole movie is so cinematically beautiful. So if you're like a movie buff, I'd highly recommend watching The Fall. But also, I can really see Lee Pace's Mars and Pisces playing a big role in the movie, because the movie is all about the juxtaposition between what is reality and what is fantasy, how the stories we can tell can also interweave into our own lives. And we can often overcome fears and challenges sometimes through like myths and legends. I'm even teaching a class on women who run with the wolves this spring. And that feels to me kind of Mars and Pisces in a weird way, like this book all about myths and legends and what it can teach us about ourselves and our human nature. So I thought I'd just shout that out for our homework for this month. What are we watching? Watch The Fall starring Lee Pace.
Totally. I'm what was it called? The Fall. The Camus. There's a book by Albert Camus called The Fall too. That also, I don't know. Never mind. Yes, I love that. Watch The Fall with Lee Pace. I love, you know, the mentioning of like the fantasy and the not knowing the difference between illusion and reality. And I think that's going to be another huge theme with this Mars and Pisces transit. So thank goodness we have Mercury and Taurus to kind of help ground our thoughts in something real, because it's going to be has the ability to be disorienting too. You know, all of this energy that we have going on this third week really has the, I think, potential to get lost in rose colored glasses or illusions or disillusions. I also think that it's important to emphasize that Mars, I mean, it will happen it's not going to happen until May. So I might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Actually, I am getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but Mars is going to come together with Neptune while Mars is in Pisces. And then Mars is going to square Neptune 3 times at the end of the year when Mars goes retrograde in Gemini. But there is an element of April and May of examining our relationship to what is real and what is true. And this is a very important time to really learn how to keep our wits about us and stay grounded and also keep up boundaries, especially cybersecurity boundaries. That starts now and will very much continue throughout 22 and will really escalate in November. So I think it's just worth saying also to kind of keep up your boundaries, to learn your boundaries and learn how to stay grounded through this energy, because it's kind of going to be with us all year in 2022. So shall we move on to the full moon in Libra?
Yes, I'll pull it up here on the screen for our YouTube
For our
watchers.
YouTube watchers, this is a very disorienting week in general. It's a great time if you can take, a couple of days off, or like take the Friday off, or take like a Monday or Tuesday off this week. It's a good one to maybe just indulge in a little bit of relaxation, R&R, rest your immune system, rest your nervous system, and kind of do something that's very soothing this week. Also very important as well. So let's chat about this new moon. Or this full moon, excuse me, this full moon in Libra, happening at 26 degrees Libra, around 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Central. Wow. Okay, so we've got this big, gorgeous full moon in Libra. It's going to be in a square to Pluto, and it's also going to be ruled by Venus, and Venus will be in Pisces still. And this is also occurring during a continuation of the Jupiter Neptune conjunction. How are you feeling? Would you like to kick us off with this one, Mel? How are you feeling into this Libra full moon?
Well, to be honest, I'm kind of sinking into the fact that it's going to be squaring my Cancer rising, exactly. So
Mm,
a little bit shooketh here. But I will say that I think I actually kind of like a lunation that is making some kind of Pluto contact. And I know that's a little bit crazy because, we think of Pluto as kind of this scary guy who has to do with trauma and fear and power. But I think this full moon could be good for maybe even releasing something we have given too much power to.
mm,
Because full moons tend to be about releasing. And I do think, this is like the full moon that is for sure about like releasing, purging, doing like that burning bowl ritual, or taking that salt bath, or doing those things that kind of ritualize the letting go process. Now, as a person who has Pluto square to my moon natally, I actually have a really complicated relationship with the phrase letting go, because I don't think it really makes that much sense. I don't think we can just say, like, okay, I'm getting up today and I'm letting that go. At least I can't. But I do think that the ritualization of purging, ending the chapter, kind of not letting certain things from the past have power over us. I think it's like a beautiful time to maybe reorient the relationship with the past, which is Pluto, and look
mm.
towards a more exciting future, which is Neptune, Jupiter, and Venus in Pisces. So, big dichotomy between the future and the past with this full moon. What are you thinking with this one, Kate?
I love that. It does bring up a big dichotomy between the future and the past. And it's also the first full moon before eclipse season. So a it is a moment of release, but also in preparation to be led. I think that the Libra energy of this full moon brings us the necessary perspective that we need in order to move forward and in order to kind of move forward and be led into eclipse season. I think we need this full moon to help again give us the perspective we need, but also remind us that we are not doing this alone and that we can't do it alone. This is a very important full moon to reach out to other people or to spend it with good company, if that resonates with you, to maybe even hold space during this new full moon with people that you love or with partners that you feel comfortable with. Full moons generally are a great time for celebration and gathering and space holding. And with the Libra energy, there is with that is Venus ruled with Venus and Pisces, there is a harmonious element to this full moon that gives us the ability to have a healing container with other people. So this full moon, I think, was most beautifully used as a healing container with other people that you love and with other people that you trust. Full moons also are the times when we get a little bit of clarity or light shines on a subject or a topic that was otherwise dark or disillusioned. And I think with all of the Piscean energy earlier this week, this is going to be an important moment where we get a little flash of clarity that we need, a flash of insight that we've been yearning for, and that comes through other people. It comes through our partnerships, and it comes through even experiences outside of ourselves that kind of teach us what we need to know or lead us where we need to go. That's how I'm really feeling into this full moon. I also do think it's important to also talk about how Mercury is going to be really close to Uranus around this time in Taurus. So there also is an element of getting some type of unexpected news or messages, either around this new moon or within a couple days, either before or after. There is this surprise element to this full moon. Excuse me if I called it a new moon earlier, but there is this willingness. I think it's important to approach not just this full moon, but this week with a willingness to be surprised or with a flexibility component to it. And again, if you have any chart placements at the ends of cardinal signs, around 26 degrees, Libra, Cancer, Libra, Aries, and Capricorn, this is really going to be an important moment for you again of release. And I really do like the idea. I really like what you said about letting go too, Mel, because I think that is often an overused phrase that sometimes it does need further definition and clarification. And I think that, this is a moment of release in order to move into eclipse season and be led where we are meant to go. And using this kind of as a container with other people, especially, is important.
I love that, Kate. I'm going to take that advice and maybe try to find like a sort of moon circle in the community, or like a sound bath or something, because I think that would be really awesome use of this full moon. And I just realized too that this full moon takes place the day before Easter. And I'm not a practicing Christian, but I do think like the story of like Jesus's like death and rebirth feels really like relevant to the chart of this full moon, just because like we have the death as like that square to Pluto, but then we have like the Jesus everlasting life energy in Pisces. And then we also have like the surprising news, like Mary Magdalene, like going to like, Jesus's grave and being like, oh shit, he's not here anymore. Like, I don't know, like there's just
That's so true. I love that.
Yeah, there's just something I can't help but think like if it resonates. I know Christianity can be a triggering topic for a lot of people, but I actually love connecting to Jesus in more of like as a spiritual entity more than like this religious figure. So
absolutely.
I think it might be good to bring some like, again, in the least like Bible Christianity pushing way, like bring some Jesus energy into the life, Jesus and his truth, which I think he was definitely more of like a Bernie Sanders of his time. So yeah, bringing that into the full moon in some way might be nice.
I love that. That's so true, especially, oh my gosh, it's such a good Easter chart, especially with the Uranus, Mercury of it all, of like, he has risen, and Mary Magdalene be like, oh my gosh, he's gone. It's so true. Oh man. Yeah. And I was born and raised Catholic as well. So that all resonates, and I completely agree. What a week, and what a way to end a monumental week, astrological week of April and of 2022. Ooh, shall we move on to the next week of April?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So on the 18th, we actually get so the week of the 18th, we start with the actual Mercury conjunct Uranus energy. The 18th is kind of when we might even feel like the energy of the full moon is almost culminating even a little bit more, because the astrology kind of peaks. Mercury will be conjunct Uranus on that Monday to kind of start that week of April. And the sun also will be exactly square Pluto that day too. and Venus will be sextile Uranus that day as well. So it's a lot of energy to start out the week. But again, I think it kind of goes along with what we were saying to start this week of April. This is a week to expect the unexpected, but also I just think to think differently about things. And the issue, or I guess the shadowy side of Mercury in Taurus, is getting stuck in a rut with our way of thinking and looping the same thoughts over and over and over again. And this is a moment this week of being shaken out of those thought patterns. And when we are willing to adjust those thought patterns, that's a potent moment for our personal growth. So I think the more we're able to adjust our opinions when we get new information, the better off we'll be this week.
I agree. I feel like if I were to kind of put this week almost like metaphorically, if we think of like the chakra system, it's a very like upper chakra kind of week. Like we got the throat chakra and the third eye kind of being about Mercury. And it's a week where, you know, we say what we mean and we mean what we say. And then we might regret it later. And like, you know, it's kind of like, do I say it or do I not? Did that come out right or did it not? So it's a very mercurial, communicative kind of vibe.
Absolutely. Also this week we enter Taurus season. So the day after we have this Mercury Uranus conjunction, the sun moves into Taurus on April 19th. This Taurus season is really, I think, the major theme for Taurus season this year are the eclipses, which we will talk about in a second. But do you have any thoughts on Taurus season, or what this Taurus season has in store, Mal?
Well, you know, if we think of Aries as kind of our moment of birth, like it's like the baby coming out of the womb and receiving its name. I think Taurus is kind of like the baby becomes the toddler and it like the baby starts to learn like this is what I want to eat and this is how I like voice my needs and all of that kind of stuff. So we might see this like aging metaphor come about with some of our goals too, like maybe some of our projects sort of become a toddler or our garden starts sprouting through the ground. That kind of thing is what I think of when I think of Taurus.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Taurus season. As a Taurus myself, it's my favorite time of year. It's just that time when the air just starts to smell delicious and the flowers really start to bloom, and we really get like the wonderful, steady spring weather that we all love and enjoy. But also on a different level, I think that this Taurus season specifically in 2022 is it's kind of a doozy. It is an important time all year. I think in 2022, a major theme is Uranus and Taurus and the eclipses that are happening around this Uranus and Taurus energy. And I think starting this, this last week, this last week of this last couple weeks of April, it's an important time for us to allow the earth to shift underneath our feet and to really start to embrace the tectonic shifts that are in store in 2022. Typically, for a normal Taurus season, we would say things like, oh, it's a time to find grounding and a time for stability and a time for, earthly pleasures and enjoyment of the finer things. But this Taurus season just feels different with the eclipses and with the sun coming together with Uranus and Taurus during eclipse season. I think now is the time to embrace change as the reality. and to move towards new ways of doing and being that have been a long time coming, and this, again, especially in with a lot of the astrology and of the springtime in March in particular, there's a lot of, examining that resistance to change. And in the end of April, that is really the time to let that resistance be felt and honored, but to move past that and to move on to new chapters and to really start thinking about the changes that have been developing in our lives since 2020, since the beginning of 2021, or since 2020, if I'm being generous. This is a very important season, this Taurus season, for the end of April and May, to like literally be shaken to our core in ways that we need to be. And the more we can embrace, as individuals and as a collective society, the more we can embrace what's new and the more we can embrace the quickening pace of our lives, the better off we'll be. Struggling against the changes and the progress that is inevitable in society is literally like trying to swim upstream or getting like stuck in that Chinese finger trap of being like, no, no, no. And that's just a recipe for frustration and anxiety. So with this Taurus season this year, it is so imperative to literally just embrace new ways of thinking, to embrace new ways of being against all of our inclinations to stay safe and to stay stuck and to stay stubborn. And like I said in the beginning of this episode, just allow yourself to be led by love. Allow yourself to be led by love. If you're being led by fear, if you're being led by anxiety, if you're being led by scarcity, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the reality of our capitalist society that we live under. But every opportunity that you have to take a step back and examine what's motivating me to make these changes. Is it love and pleasure, or is it fear and scarcity? Lean towards that loving energy if and when you can. And, if you feel like you can't, really like get to the bottom of that and see how true that is. Is that actually true, or is this just a programmed story that we've been telling ourselves over and over again? Really important for this Taurus season. That's my main spiel for the Taurus season this year.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And traditionally Uranus doesn't really have essential dignities, but Uranus being in Taurus right now, if I were to like modernize the essential dignities, I would be like, okay, Uranus is like in detriment in Taurus, so it is funny that, Taurus season has been so influenced by Uranus and Taurus since 2018. So I really, agree with everything you said about changing our patterns of our old structures.
And when I think of Uranus and Taurus, I always think of Uranian energy as lightning. It is because Uranus is the sky god, and I think of sky god lightning, and I think of Taurus as Mother Earth, as Gaia, and I think of, when I think of Uranus and Taurus, I think of lightning that is like sending shock waves down to to a mountain or to these to an immovable object, that just sends these like electric currents and these electric jolts through the structures of our very foundations. I think like now that I'm talking about it, I think of like fracking, although that's water that gets shot down into the earth. I think of like how destabilizing that can feel. And it's important to just be prepared for a little bit of destabilization here, because resisting is just not going to do anybody any good. Not this year. No sir, no ma'am. No sir, no ma'am. So the end of this week is pretty uneventful. Honestly, we get a couple. Mercury comes together with the North Node, I think, that weekend, which might give us a little bit of news, or give us a little bit again of a feeling of being pulled in a specific direction. I always think of nodesy stuff, as especially North Node stuff, as feeling like pulled towards something. But then Mercury kind of comes into a square with Saturn on the 24th. So I would say for this weekend, for the weekend of the 23rd and 24th, to follow your instincts on where you feel like you're being led, and don't take it personally if you receive any messages that rub you the wrong way or that give you a little dose of reality. Approach it with a mature mindset, but trust that you are being led down the right path this week, or trust that the right people and the right conversations and the right messages are coming to you at the right time. Even though it might feel like it's a little harsh, it is worth it, and it is there to serve you, especially that weekend of the 23rd and the 24th. Any thoughts on this weekend, Mal?
I think you really covered it. Like it kind of goes back to our reaction time and how much time, like you said, we're letting things kind of marinate and kind of reveal the truth to us instead of racing towards the truth with our own willpower.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the final week of May, that goes from about the 25th to the 1st of May, or the last week of April. That goes from the 25th to the 1st. So this week, I mean, I think that the main story of the week is well, actually three things. We have Venus conjunct Neptune on the 27th, and then we have Mercury moving into Gemini on the 29th. And then we have the first eclipse. We have a Taurus new moon eclipse on the 30th. Oh, also I should add, Mercury enters its shadow on the 26th. So we have Mercury in its shadow on the 26th, Venus conjunct Neptune the 27th. Little Mercury trine Pluto, and then we have Mercury in Gemini and an eclipse towards the end of the week. So a lot of astrology to end the month of April, and May is just a wild ride of astrology. So kind of ending the month with a bang as well. So what are your thoughts kind of to start the week for this last week, Mal? Any thoughts on Mercury shadow, or even on like that Venus conjunct Neptune that you're feeling into?
Well, I think for the Mercury shadow, Kate, I think it might kind of reiterate some of the things we've said about like the previous week, like being careful what we say, and like knowing that our messages will probably have to be reevaluated, just because this upcoming Mercury retrograde will be in both Gemini and Taurus. So we'll have to kind of reevaluate a lot of things that are happening during this Mercury transit. And this mixed with Venus Neptune, I speak from the perspective of having Venus Neptune in my own natal chart. So Venus and Neptune tends to see the good of people, it tends to be trusting. And Venus Neptune also tends to see like the optimism of the situation. And there's nothing wrong with this, but there is something about like the mix of the upcoming Mercury retrograde, where it's like, are you really seeing the full truth of this situation? But one time, one of my astrology teachers, Gemini Brett, he's so good, and he was like talking to me about my Venus Neptune, and I was kind of down on my Venus Neptune. I was like, oh man, like Venus Neptune, I always like, make up people in my head, like, and like, I don't see the real qualities of a person in front of me. Like, I only see the good in them, and then I end up missing their red flags or whatever. And he was like, well, that's like such a gift in a way, because, even if you do over idealize some people, you still saw them for like their highest good. So even if they don't ever become that, it's a gift to be able to see people's highest potential. So that really hit me. It made me feel better about having Venus Neptune in my own chart, like the gift of seeing the highest potential of a situation, of a person, even if it doesn't actually manifest. There's something there about like, okay, at least I saw what could have been. And I don't know, that can be kind of enlightening if you let it be, if that makes any sense, Kate.
Yeah. And it's also does somebody such a kindness. Like when you look at somebody else and you see them for their highest potential, that makes them feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in a world where everybody's, where there's a lot of toxicity and gossip. And we've all felt that when other people see us for our highest potential and not for our faults and our shortcomings. It's empowering. It's a kindness. And it also psychologically kind of brings that out more and fosters that. So I love that. I love that take for that Venus conjunct Neptune on the 27th. And I think that is a really important takeaway for anyone out there to see other people for their highest potential this week, and not just in seeing the good in that, really, and appreciating the good things about that.
Sometimes I think about Venus Neptune too as like the teacher who like, they see like the troublemaker in the class, and
Mm,
the troublemaker like knows that they fucked up, but the teacher still sees like, you're really smart, and they like tell you that, and
yeah.
that teacher ends up changing that person's life because
Yeah.
they were the ones who said, okay, yeah, you fucked up, but you're not a fuck up. Like,
Oh,
like you
absolutely.
made this mistake, but you can still do good. So don't let this define you. Like, that's kind of the
Yeah.
voice of Venus Neptune sometimes.
Oh yeah, I had a manager in my early career that literally saw the best in everybody, and then that brought out the best in everybody. And when that manager left, then of course everything collapsed because, it was just resting on one person. But still, for that magical moment, it really brought out the best in everybody because that's what they chose to see. And that's really what came forward. So there is a magic in that is really important. And I love that take for that April, or for the middle of that week on April 27th. Towards the end of the week, Mercury moves into Gemini, and I think it's important to take this Mercury into Gemini with a grain of salt, because Mercury is going to be moving into the sign of Gemini on the 29th, where it will station retrograde in May. So I think that with this Mercury in Gemini, it's probably the most important just to remember that any ideas are meant to be any thoughts, ideas, mental stimulation, we're meant to be reworking that throughout May. Really for towards the end of this week, take your ideas with a grain of salt, and we're meant to be turning ideas to reality in the end of April and May. It's not necessarily about moving forward, but it's about reworking what's right in front of you to make it tangible and bring it down to earth. So keep that in mind, especially around the 29th, that this is not a time to be rushing forward with our ideas. It's a time to be strengthening what's right in front of us and saying, how can I take this and actually make it work and make it real?
Kate. And I think that goes along with like, if we can go into a little bit of the eclipse season
Let's talk about this eclipse.
at the end of the month, because eclipse season, we're not really looking at a great time to like begin and initiate new things. Eclipse seasons tend to be times of like wrapping up and endings of cycles. So I love what you said about like just focus on what you have to finish up right now.
Mm-hmm.
No starting anything new until the stuff that you've been procrastinating is like focused on. Like do your taxes for your business before you start your other business this year, and I do think that we did talk about this, I think, briefly on a previous episode, but just even the eclipses taking place on the Scorpio Taurus axis, I do think karmically Scorpio and Taurus teaches us about control, and how we often want to control outcomes, other people, controlling, or even lack of control too. Like it can go both sides of the spectrum. So I think there is something here about like, what do I actually have control over? Oh, myself and my actions. And how am I going to utilize that as my power instead of trying to like manipulate outcomes during eclipse season, which will not exactly work out in your favor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This eclipse on April 30th, speaking of which, well, number one, I think it's important just to say eclipse seasons again are not the best times to initiate. And we're not saying like don't live your life and don't or like, but it just, if you're sowing the seeds of intention, you don't have to try to initiate right now. It's already moving. Life is already going to be doing that for you. You don't necessarily have to impose your will during eclipse season because the universe will take you where you're meant to go during these time periods. There's a need during eclipse seasons to have that out with the old and with the new attitude. And also, there is this element of fatedness, of destiny, or just like of the hands of karma to come in and lead you and take things away, and also to bring things forward. I think for the new moon on April 30th, this new moon takes place on the North Node. So, with a North Node eclipse, that represents the hand that grasps. So, there is a lot about this new moon that has to do with embracing what future we're moving towards. And I think that also aligns with that, this kind of visionary, aspirational quality of April in general. The end of this month might even feel, especially during this eclipse, like a important time to grasp onto the future. This is every eclipse season of 2022 is like this is a year of anti-hoarding. This is a year where not everything can come with you as we move forward into the future. Specifically with this new moon on April 30th, I get the energy that this is the time to break the cycle. Like, this is an important time to break your own cycles and to get out of your rut. This is an important time also to be really showing the seeds of change that will blossom over the next 6 months and really come to a head in November. But also, this is a time of opening new chapters and embracing new chapters in life at the end of April. A big moment, especially for embracing those chapters with how closely configured this is to Uranus. Any initial thoughts on this from you, Mel? How are you feeling into the energy of this new moon eclipse?
I think out of all the eclipses, like that can be kind of chaotic or kind of like the bearer of bad news, I don't actually see this eclipse being all that bad. It feels like it kind of echoes the themes of the month, of like whatever is wrapping up or ending right now has like this sweetness about it, because it's like there's this idea of like something being birthed. We don't quite know what that is yet. But I kind of like that the eclipse, North Node in Taurus, South Node in Scorpio, both go back to two planets in Pisces, Venus in Pisces. So it's kind of cool that this eclipse in some way leads us back to the Piscean energy, which is one of the main themes of this month. And I do notice too that Venus is conjunct Jupiter during this eclipse. So yeah, the ruler of this new moon eclipse is Venus conjunct Jupiter. So that seems pretty optimistic in some way.
It does. That's a good sign for this eclipse. It's a good start to the eclipse season. I think it has on the shadowy side, it has the potential to feel disoriented or disorienting, but on the bright side, there's so much creativity and so much almost divine intervention I get here with this. I think that if we've been not having the greatest Pisces, Jupiter and Pisces transit, this is a moment where we really might feel a little bit more of that optimism come into play.
Definitely. And I have my archetype oracle deck here by Kim Kranz, and I did pull this archetype called the threshold. And for people who are listening on the podcast, it's this card, and you can kind of see this person's feet kind of on a threshold of like a new surface. And I kind of like that as our archetype for this eclipse. Like we are on the threshold of something. What that something is yet, we're not sure. We won't really know until May. But right now, it's a big moment of, like you said, divine trust, trusting in divine timing, trusting that the human consciousness of how time works, like right now it being 2:30 or whatever, and right now it being the month of March, that's only a snippet of how time actually works. The human consciousness can't understand the greater perspective of divine timing. So I really like that kind of idea, Kate, of just kind of trusting in the higher power during this time. Jesus, take the wheel.
Absolutely. And I think that we'll end on that. Jesus, take the wheel towards the end of April. And May is even more of a doozy. So please come back to us in May. We have so much more to talk about. It's not over. Mal, any shameless plugs or anything you'd like to share with any folks listening for upcoming events?
Well, my only shameless plug at the moment is that my Women Who Run with the Wolves tarot class, it's kind of like a tarot class book club hybrid, starts on April 7th. It's going to be Thursday evenings for, I think it's about a 7-week class. We have some breaks in between. So if you've been looking for an interesting class, if you're kind of a tarot nerd, but also want to read a book and kind of be in a really witchy environment to explore a really amazing text, go to my website, malloryhasty.com, and you can sign up for my Women Who Run with the Wolves class.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mal, for being with us. For any listeners out there, if you liked what you heard from this podcast, throw us a couple stars wherever you're listening. We would appreciate it. We're two astrologers, so we love stars. And, we hope that this is as helpful for you for orienting your month as it is for us. I also think it's worth mentioning, just if you're in the mood to get a reading from myself or even Mal, my books are going to be a lot more limited in May. So really April is probably one of the best times to get a reading from me. If you've been feeling into this energy or just need some guidance for the upcoming eclipse season, now would be a great time. May, I'll just be doing some traveling again, so my availability will be a little more limited. So just want to give that shout out and say thank you to all of our listeners. We love you, and we are wishing you the best for this pretty wild month of May ahead.
Yes. Thanks, listeners. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful rest of your month.
Bye.